Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the All Bugs Good and Bad webinar series. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat box. On the left side of the screen, you can type your questions in there, and if they're not answered by the end of the presentation, we will address them. Today we have with us Elizabeth Wizzie Brown. She is the Integrated Pest Management Program Specialist with the Texas AgriLife Extension Service. She will be presenting Keep Ants and Cockroaches from Ruining Your Holidays. All right, Wizzie, if you're ready, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, so we are going to talk about two very common insect pests that can come into your house today. And since the holidays are coming up, hopefully we can get a handle on them for you before they really become a problem. So here are the culprits that we're talking about. We're going to have ants on the left-hand part of the screen, and cockroaches are going to be on the right. And there are different kinds of ants and cockroaches, of course. But major characteristics of ants is that they tend to have that pinched waist, and they also have elbowed antennae. If you look at cockroaches, their body shape is more of an elongated oval shape. They have very long, kind of straight antennae. And then they also have those kind of scurrying legs. They also look, some people call it greasy. I prefer to call their wings leathery looking, but I tend to like cockroaches. So people don't understand that, but they're just kind of my thing. So the pictures that we have here, in the upper left-hand corner, those are actually fire ants that have moved into the building from outside. Beside that, we have a pharaoh ant, also known as a sugar ant, and it's eating some bait. And then on the bottom, we have some little black ants that found some donuts at a meeting that I was at. And then on the right-hand side for the cockroaches, we have two of the common culprits that I get calls on. The top right picture is the German cockroach, and then the bottom left picture is the American cockroach. So why do we need to manage cockroaches and ants? They are common pests. These are pretty common calls that I get and common calls for pest control people. They can invade human food resources, whether that is in your kitchen. It could get into storage facilities. They also are capable of transferring bacteria or other organisms onto your food. So when you think about cockroaches, you tend to think about them kind of living in nasty, dirty areas. But I think that might be one of the reasons that people don't like cockroaches. So they're associated with a dirty area where you would find bacteria. So they are capable of picking that up on their body, and then if they happen to walk onto your kitchen counter or onto your dishes, then they can transfer that possibly onto those surfaces. Some other issues are in regards to human health. A lot of times we can have ants that will bite or sting. If you are in a part of the country that has fire ants, you are probably very familiar with ants being capable of stinging and causing a very painful spot. And depending on how you react to that, it could just cause some reddening and burning in the area and then lead to a pustule a few days later. There are other people that are severely allergic to fire ants, and one sting can send them to the hospital. We already talked about contamination, so I'm not going to repeat myself there. And then in relation to cockroaches again, there are people that are allergic to cockroaches. And a lot of times, if they have things like German cockroaches living in the house, they can actually have reactions to the cast skins that they leave behind when they grow bigger. So they can either have an allergic reaction, or people may have asthmatic reactions as well. So when we are dealing with any type of a pest problem, whether that is cockroaches or ants or weeds or some sort of mammal even, we have basically three things that they require for their survival. And that would be food, water, and harborage, which is just a fancy way of saying a place to live. So basically they need the same stuff that we need to survive. And that a lot of the times is why they like moving into our house, especially when the outside conditions aren't so wonderful. So typically you will have insects moving into your structure when it's really cold outside, when it's really hot outside, when food resources may not be readily available outside, or it could be that it's really, really raining and really, really wet, and they're moving inside to escape that really moist condition, and they're trying to get into a drier location. So basically what we're going to try to do with this pest triangle is we're trying to get rid of one or more of the sources that they need for survival. And we're hoping with doing so that they're going to be able to move to a new location that has resources that they require, or they're going to end up dying. So when we talk about managing these type of insects, we really want to focus on doing an integrated program. Some of these species, it's really not great to just use one sort of tactic to control them. So we're going to try to give you a whole bunch of different tools that you can utilize to help you form an integrated program that would be a better control method. So the thing that you need to do with this is you need to determine the location of the infestation. So basically, where are the bugs in your house? And that we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later on. We also want to reduce any food sources that they might be acquiring, any water sources, and then any harborage areas that we might find. And then using preventative measures in areas that we suspect might get infestations can help to cut down on future populations. And then also using the integrated approach. So when we talk about monitoring, this is going to help us track down where those infestations are. So when you think about this, you got to kind of think like a bug. So put on your cockroach or ant brain and think about what you would require. So we talked about that previously. We need food, we need water, we need a place to live. So while we're humans, we need a big place to live. Insects don't need a lot of space because they're much, much smaller than we are. They don't need a lot of food and they don't need a lot of water. So when you think about those little crumbs that might be under your kid's bed because they were eating cookies up there, and I have had this personally happen to me because I have a six-year-old son, and he had eaten candy behind his bed, and he's not allowed to do that, so he was hiding, and he ended up having acrobats move into that area after a few days because there were little candy crumbs on the floor, and he was panicking because there was ants, and that's when he had to fess up what he did. So we got the stuff cleaned up, and the insects actually went away. So it's a really good idea to think about what they require. So look for where they're coming in. So that would be entry areas, things like doors, windows, weep holes, any sort of cracks or crevices that might allow them access into the house. Any place that is near water, so usually that's going to be near a sink area, and so that would lead us to look in kitchen and bathroom areas. We also have a picture there of a potted plant, but if you see that potted plant actually has one of the drip trays to catch excess water. That is another location that insects can get water from, so you would need to check those sort of areas as well. Then we also want to look near food. So we can look in pantry areas. We can look under the kitchen table where there might be crumbs. So usually the majority of the food in a house is going to be in the kitchen area. But as I described in my example, sometimes that food doesn't stay where we're hoping it's going to stay. So you may need to look other areas as well. And then harborage areas, where can they hide? A lot of times these are going to be in wall voids or other areas that we don't necessarily know that they're hiding in, but we can use some tools to help track down where they might actually be coming from. When we're talking about outside the structure, since a lot of these insects will come in on the outside, they'll be living out there and they'll move indoors, you want to look to see where they might be accessing the house. So you can look where pipes go in. So a lot of times that's going to be around the AC unit or water faucets or things like that. You want to look at weep holes. Weep holes are those little spaces on brick and stone facade structures that allow air to move in and out of the wall void. And so that is a good place where all sorts of stuff can come into the house that's small. Looking along roof lines, gutter areas, looking around windows and doorways, all of those are going to be good areas that you need to make sure are sealed really well. And if they're not, then you would need to do something to seal that area up. So what are we looking for? We're looking for the insects themselves. So look for the ants, look for the cockroaches. We can look for various things when we're talking about cockroaches. There's also things like cockroach egg cases, which is that top middle picture there. Let me get this arrow. So this right here is the cockroach egg case, this little brown thing. And we also have some stuff over here. This is the fire ant dirt that they brought in with them when they came inside. We can also look for our cast skin. Obviously, that is a cockroach cast skin. So the cockroach molted and got bigger, and it left that skin behind. Here are fragments of insects that have been left behind for various reasons. And then over here, this stuff is actually cockroach fecal material. So you can also look for that. When we're talking about ants, you can look for large amounts of ants like the ones over here. These are fire ants that were coming up through a crack in the slab in my office building, and I had to take care of them, unfortunately. And then outside, these are acrobat ants that were trailing and actually coming in through a space that was in the window. So to locate the insects, a lot of times we will use traps. And this is probably the most common one here, this kind of triangular shaped trap. So this is made out of cardboard, and then it just has a sticky glue substance down here. And you want to put it up against the wall so when the insects are walking along, they're just not even going to notice it, and they're going to walk across the glue and get stuck. This one down here shows a great kind of trap that you can make at home from a 2-liter bottle that can help you trap cockroaches outside to find out where you might be having problems. And then this drawing over here actually shows you different places that you can stick sticky traps in a kitchen area to help figure out where the insects are coming from. So you see they're putting them on top of the cabinets, along the baseboards, underneath different appliances like the refrigerator and the stove, and then also under the sink. So areas where it's going to be either warm and dark, so they can hide, places where they can access water or they can get food. So when we're talking about traps, you want to put them in a variety of locations. That way you can track down where that population is. And you want to put them where the roaches are going to encounter them. Typically, we're going to use traps for monitoring cockroaches, but you can also get ants on them because I have had that happen. You want to check them regularly, and if you look, some of the traps have these handy little things that you can write on there, so you don't have to keep throwing away the trap if you get one insect on it. You can write the date on there, and you can say, oh, there was 1 cockroach. And so then when you go back a week later, you can check the trap, and if there's 5 cockroaches, you know that 4 of them are new. The other thing that I want to point out about these 2 trap pictures here, this right here on the bottom picture is a great placement. You can see that it is up against the wall, and when the insects walk, they're just going to walk across the glue and get stuck. This one, on the other hand, is vertical, and I know of no cockroach that is going to run across this, run up the wall, and then run back down this way. So that trap probably isn't going to do anyone any good with its placement. You can also use a flashlight to inspect various areas like the pantry, as he's doing here, or by the refrigerator and other appliances to look in those cracks and crevices to see what might be back in those particular areas. So then you need to properly identify what you're doing. So make sure you know what type of ant you're dealing with or what type of cockroach. There are some ants that can only really be baited for control, and if you spray for them with a pesticide, you tend to break up the colony even more, and it makes it difficult to control them. But if you just put out a bait, they'll take the bait and they'll basically kill off themselves. With cockroaches, there are different types of cockroaches, and some of those are mainly outdoor species and would be coming inside looking for the food, water, and harborage that we were talking about. But there are other cockroaches that will actually live and breed inside, and their whole entire population is going to be inside. So that would be controlled a little bit differently than some of those other species. So it's really important that you figure out what you actually have so you can figure out what strategy is going to be next or what's going to be used properly. So to identify this, you can either do it yourself if you are someone who is good at identifying insects. You can either capture the insect itself or you can take a digital photo of it. And you can actually send that to a pest control operator that you're working with, or you can send it to an extension service like us. We are a great resource. Or you can do things like getting extension guides or using the extension.org site to figure out what you're actually using. And some good ideas to get, you might need a magnifying glass or a hand lens such as this. So look at some of these insects because some of them can be very small and difficult to discern. So when we're talking about prevention, we're going to talk about a lot of stuff that you can do to try to avoid having these problems in the first place. So the first one we're going to cover is sanitation. So these are just common everyday things that you're probably already doing that can help reduce having ant problems and cockroach problems in the first place. So sanitation is just going to be your fancy word for cleaning. And doing things like vacuuming on a regular basis, getting the edges, getting under the furniture, getting under the cushions of the couch. I know that's a problem for me. I looked in the couch underneath the cushions the other day and I was appalled at the amount of crumbs that were in there. So that's probably on my to-do list for this weekend. Sweeping, if you don't have carpeting, and then sweeping and mopping the floor is going to be very important to get that debris up. You want to make sure that you take your garbage out regularly. And generally, that isn't going to be too much of a problem. You may need to pick up how often you take out your garbage in the summertime when the weather's a little bit warmer, just to avoid some of those problems because things can decay because it's a little more warm. Make sure that you are cleaning your garbage cans, your recycling cans, and any type of outdoor dumpster area to reduce the debris and stuff that builds up in those areas. I know in my garbage cans, even though I use a liner in the garbage can, somehow stuff always tends to drip out of the bag. And it kind of builds up on the bottom of the garbage can, and so there's always this kind of sticky substance on the bottom. That is enough food for ants and cockroaches. So just kind of on a quarterly basis or whenever you see it or whatever, just take some cleaner and clean that stuff out of there so you don't have that food available. You want to make sure that you clean drains, including garbage disposals, just to get rid of the organic matter that may be building up in those particular areas. Reducing clutter to get rid of any areas where those insects may hide. A big one here is the plastic bags that everything comes home in these days. A lot of people have areas where they store those, which is great that they're reusing them, but those need to be checked on occasion to make sure that they're not harboring insects, because those are a good place where there's lots of nooks and crannies for them to hide in. Doing things like repairing leaking faucets can do that, whether that's inside or outside, because just that small drip of water is going to be enough water for those insects to use. And then another biggie is actually cleaning out the gutters outside. Make sure that there's not debris building up there. Some more things to look for. These are kind of the no-nos on this slide. So piling things up right next to the house, that allows the insects to be closer to the structure, and it gives them lots of hiding places in the area, and so it makes it easier for them to move indoors. Making sure that compost areas are away from the structure a good distance. The compost bin has lots of stuff in it, and cockroaches and ants like to get in there because it's warm, it's moist, and it has plenty of food. So make sure those are well away from the structure. Cleaning out microwaves. This is the microwave at our office, unfortunately. And it doesn't get cleaned out very often, so it's got lots of crumbs and bits of food, so the insects can go in there. Piled up boxes or other debris, make sure that that gets taken care of and cleaned. On the bottom right there, you see that there is a water leak here, and there is water built up on the tile, so the repair would need to be done so that's not leaking. And then making sure that the garbage liner stays on the garbage can and that the food actually gets thrown away on a regular basis. So mechanical control would be the next step. Make sure that you're using proper techniques. So these would be using labor and materials to reduce the pests. So this would include excluding them, keeping them actually out of the structure in the first place. You could do things like hand picking or squishing them. If you smash a cockroach with your shoe, that is technically mechanical control. Vacuuming would also work here. I know a lot of people, they get creeped out by cockroaches that will just suck them up with a vacuum cleaner, and that is perfectly fine. So when we're talking about these things, if you have stored products that they can get into, you may want to store those into a container that they can't get into, so transfer those into plastic containers. Vacuuming up any debris that might fall on shelves, so you're reducing the food that they might have. Repairing screens that are possibly areas that they can get into. We have sealant or caulk being used around pipe penetrations in this photo. That just is sealing up that area so nothing can get in there. And this is also using sealant, but in a different way. So this is a pantry shelf that is here in our office, and it has this crack right here. So I cleaned this out really well, and then I put that sealant along that crack so the food debris couldn't actually build up in there. Because even when you're storing things like flour, it's got that dust and stuff that will actually accumulate in those areas. And then these two are probably the big ones. Down here is using steel wool, but usually I suggest that people use copper mesh to put into the weep holes, and you're physically blocking insects from being able to get into there. You can certainly use steel wool, but just be aware if it gets wet, it will rust and it can stain. If you use the copper, it's not going to be as much of a problem rusting. And then the very top one there is trimming back trees that are either touching or overhanging the structure. A lot of times you will have all sorts of animals, not just insects, using these trees to get onto the roof of the structure, and then they will come down into the structure through the attic, and then they can move throughout the house to wherever they want. So there's also biological control for some types of insects. And when we're talking about cockroaches, there are things like house centipedes, which is this one over here. So that big kind of weird looking one that has lots of legs. There are geckos. I know in Texas here we have geckos, and a lot of people don't like them in their homes, but I actually keep them in my house when I see them because I know that they're there eating other insects. We also have this critter over here. A lot of times people will see these in their home and they get kind of worried because they think it's going to cause some major problem. If you find this wasp, it's called an ensign wasp. If you find that in your house, that means that you have cockroaches in there because these are actually insects that will lay their eggs in the cockroach egg case. And when their eggs hatch out, the little tiny larvae of the wasp will actually eat the cockroaches that are developing. So there's this one, which is large. It's probably about the size of a housefly. And then there's this other species of parasitic wasp that's very, very tiny that also does the same thing there. So when we're talking about managing things with chemical control, this is where things can get a little tricky, because a lot of people want things to die right away, and they like to see the cockroach on its back and actually having its legs twitched in the air. And, you know, if that's your thing, then that's fine. But again, we're trying to use an integrated approach. And when you're using an integrated approach, it's really best to start with a bait product for these insects. So baits come in a variety of forms. We have dust, we have gels, we have paste, we have ready-made bait stations, and then there are also granular baits that are available. So the two pictures here, there is one that is showing a gel bait, and this is actually baiting for cockroaches here. So cockroaches, German cockroaches, can get in a whole bunch of different places in the kitchen. So a lot of times they like really tight spaces. So seams like this in the kitchen cabinet where that would press up, that's a good area to bait. And when you are using a gel bait, you want to have a pea-sized amount. A lot of people put out this big honking glob of bait, and it's really way too much for you to actually have out for those cockroaches or even for ants. So you want to make sure that you're using the proper amount. You also need to make sure that you replace bait when it starts to dry out. It's not going to be good forever. It doesn't last forever. So you would need to take a putty knife to scrape off any old bait that might be left if you are trying to rebait for something. Then the bottom picture down here, if you look right here by the hand, that is one of the bait stations. So this is a ready-made bait station that comes preloaded with bait. You just basically break the little pack because it's usually attached to other bait stations. And then you would slide that under, in this case, the oven. You could slide that underneath where the kitchen sink is. So you're going to put those in areas where those insects are going to be located. So when we're talking about ants and cockroaches, and we're talking about bait, we also need to talk about aversion, and that basically is them avoiding particular baits. And there have been cases of insects doing this. It really depends on the insect, and it depends on the type of bait you're using. So basically my rule of thumb is get a bait, put it out. If they're not eating it, go to the store, get something different, and try another product. Sometimes it's going to be trial or error, and you're going to have to figure out what exactly they like to eat in your house, because it can be different for you and your neighbor. So when we are baiting, we need to make sure that we're using fresh bait. Like I said, it does not last forever. And you also need to clean up the dried old bait. So if you look at this picture down here on the bottom, the big problem here is the amount of bait that's used. Remember, we want a pea-sized amount, so a very small amount of bait. And while this big glob of bait has cockroaches eating it, basically what you're doing there is you're putting out too much chemical and you're wasting product that you could be using in other places. Because they're not going to eat all of this, and you just can put out the smaller amount and still get the amount of control that you want. Another big thing about baits is going to be up here, proper placement. Like I said earlier, you want to make sure that you're putting the bait in the areas where those insects are going to find it. So make sure that it's going to be an area where they are looking for food, where they're looking for water, or where they're going to hide. And usually that's not in the middle of the kitchen counter. The ants may be looking in the middle of the kitchen counter for food because that's where your crumbs are. But cockroaches are tending to be in hidden areas that are dark. So make sure that you're thinking like a bug. The last thing that we need to talk about when you're using a bait is a product that you're using as a food source for the insect. And in that food, there is an active ingredient that will end up killing the insect. So basically, they find the bait, they eat it as a food, And sometimes they'll take it back to the colony and share it with the other insects, depending on what one you're talking about. And so you can kill off an ant colony by them sharing the bait. So if you're using bait and you have a sandwich sitting on the counter, it's probably not going to work as well for you as you hoped. So you want to get rid of any other food sources that they might have. That way the only food that is available to them is going to be that bait, and you're going to kind of force them to eat it in that case. So when we're talking about management and using chemicals other than bait, basically here we're going to target crack and crevice treatments. So we're going to target where they're actually going to hide. And again, there's different products that you can use for this. Generally, they're going to be either in a dust formulation or a spray formulation. So when we're talking about this, we are talking about crack and crevice treatments, not bombing everything. I know that a lot of people have tried before for various insects, the bug bombs, that you get this little aerosol can and you set it off in the middle of the room and it kind of fills up the entire space. That is not going to work for cockroaches and ants, because if you think of where they are, they're hiding in all the little nooks and crannies. And so that aerosol pesticide being up in the middle of the room is not going to reach them when they're hiding back in a wall void area, or if they're underneath the kitchen sink, or they're hiding underneath the stove. So the bombs are not really going to work for these insects. If you do choose to use a spray, which you see right here in this top picture, you want to treat the cracks and crevices. So this is a space where this is an oven over here, and here is a refrigerator. So they have a nice cozy area that's dark, and it's also going to be warm for them to hide in. So that would be a great area to treat with that sort of spray. We also have dust, which this is showing you a dust down here. And generally when you're using dust, you're going to use those in areas that is out of the way and that dust isn't going to be stirred up on a regular basis, because you don't want to be breathing that in yourself. So here what they're doing is they are actually putting this into the wall void. So you have the pipe coming through the wall for the sink there, and so there's a little space that they're actually using to put that dust into the wall void. You do not want to use a lot of dust when you do put a dust out. You're trying to get a translucent covering of the dust, because if you put too much out, the insects are going to just completely avoid that area and they're not going to go through it. And so that's going to defeat the purpose of them coming into contact with that pesticide. If you put out that really thin layer, then they're going to just walk across it and not even know that it's there. And this can work really well when you're trying to control cockroaches with something like boric acid. What happens is if you have that light coating of boric acid dust, the cockroach will walk across it. They don't even know that they're picking it up really on their body until they're done, and then they'll groom themselves. So cockroaches are constantly grooming themselves, and so they'll groom that boric acid off of their body, and that is actually having them ingest it. And boric acid works as a stomach poison. So they're basically dosing themselves with the pesticide by cleaning it off of themselves. So again, make sure that you're not using copious amounts of it. So that's why if you look at this, that is why the bottle is tilted at the angle that it is, that it's not getting this big amount making it look like it's snowed in the wall void. So another type of dust that is commonly used for ants and cockroaches are the silica dust or the diatomaceous earth products. And those work by causing the insect to desiccate or lose water. And so you need to make sure that those are used in temperature-controlled areas where they're not going to be able to absorb water from the ambient air. So that is the end of the presentation. If anybody has questions, I would be happy to answer them. I am going to turn this over to Lucy.
All right. Thank you so much, Wizzie. We greatly appreciate your time today. There are a few questions. Suzanne, do you mind putting up the poll questions? There are a few poll questions that we'd like you all to answer real quick. And in the meantime, if you have questions that were not answered, go ahead and type them in the chat box. There's been a question, what do you think about mixing boric acid with jelly or other sweets? It's listed as a home remedy for outside ants.
I have talked to numerous people that have done this. Boric acid, usually mixed with like a mint apple jelly or something like that, seems to be the classic mix. And you know, they seem to have success with it. I don't know if there is any specific research showing efficacy on that, so I can't really give a hard answer on that.
Okay. Will boric acid work for silverfish?
It may work a little bit, but it's probably not going to work as well for cockroaches, as well as it would for cockroaches. Silverfish, you might want to try like a silica dust or a diatomaceous earth product because they do have a fairly thin exoskeleton.
Okay. We have a question that's asking, what is the most effective active ingredient in a roach bait? So if you were to purchase a roach bait station, what active ingredient should they look for?
That depends on a variety of things. They all tend to work. It just depends on the aversion, and that's not usually to the active ingredient. That's usually to the formulation of the food part of the thing. So all of the active ingredients are going to work. It just depends on how quickly you want things to get knocked down and that sort of thing.
Okay. We still have a few more questions coming through.
Okay.
Thank you. Suzanne, you can take the poll questions down if you don't mind. I've entered in the chat box an additional link for Qualtrics. If you have time, please go to it. Right now, Wizzie Brown's information is up if you'd like to contact her. She has a Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, and a blog spot. You got all the bases covered.
I'm trying.
What is good control for cockroaches that mostly live outside? So if you have them outside, maybe in your flower beds, mulch, what would be a good control?
I am of the firm mind, if they are outside, they are where they are supposed to be. So a lot of people don't like having cockroaches in their compost piles because they apparently are grossed out by cockroaches. But you know, cockroaches outside are doing their thing. They are eating organic matter. They're helping to break that stuff down. So what I would recommend if you have cockroaches outside is to go around the outside of your structure and make sure that there's no place that they can get in. So make sure that you're checking the window screens to make sure they're in good repair. Check the weather stripping around your doors and windows, that there aren't any gaps in that they can get in. Trimming back any trees or shrubs that touch or overhang the structure. Sealing any sort of pipe penetration. Doing things like that is really going to keep those cockroaches where they need to be.
Okay. Are there any more questions? If not, remember that the webinar is recorded and it will be posted by Monday. You can go to the extension.org website, or the link will be available on the extension.org Facebook page as well. And then one last time, the Qualtrics link. If you have time, please go and answer the questions and provide a little feedback for us. Wizzie, again, thank you for taking your time to be with us today. We hope that everyone will be able to join us again next month, the first Friday in November, November 6th. We will have Let's Beat the Bug, New Things to Know About Bed Bugs, presented by Dr. Stephen Kells. And with that, I believe we may have finished early today.